This is Aftercast. You've got episode 29. Hello, this is Brandy Venzel, and I am pleased to welcome you to Aftercast, the audio companion to the Afterthoughts blog. For many years now, Afterthoughts has been a sort of intellectual watering hole for all of you classical Charlotte Mason homeschooling mamas out there. I like to call you Afterthinkers. You are thinking people, idea people, who never let a good book go to waste. You keep yourselves intellectually agile by reading books, often old books, and seeking out the best that has been thought and said and mixing it into your everyday lives of laundry and dishes and dinner and long division. I'm interrupting our Charlotte Mason series to bring you this season's special conversation. Brittany McGann is back with me today. Hopefully you recognize her from last season. Brittany has been studying Charlotte Mason for over 7 years. Mason's philosophy embodies all the things Brittany loved about her own upbringing and everything she would have wished for in her education had she known it was possible. Brittany hosted Grace to Build a retreat in Black Mountain, North Carolina for 3 years and has presented workshops at multiple Charlotte Mason conferences. These days, she is teaching her 3 children, leading 2 Charlotte Mason groups, and working with her husband to restore native plants to their 3.5 acres. You can find Brittany's articles at Charlotte Mason Poetry, Charlotte Mason Living, and the Charlotte Mason Institute blogs. She has been a guest on a Delectable Education podcast and also written the introduction for paper modeling by M. Swinnell, one of the Sloyd books used in the PNEU programs. You can find that book through Amazon or Living Library Press. Today, Brittany and I discuss the mother's compass. We talk about working within limitations for both ourselves and our children. It's a great discussion you won't want to miss. Today, we're talking about the mother's compass. And honestly, when you brought this up to me, I had completely forgotten about this quote. So do you want, Brittany, to start us off with just reading it and explaining a little bit of what she's talking about?
I don't have the whole quote with me. Just
I should say Charlotte Mason quote because, do you have the...
I just have my note. Okay, that's what I'm looking at. Okay. I just didn't know if you wanted me to read the whole thing.
Nah, that's all right. We'll do the cheater version. Like when people use a Bible verse and they're like, John 3:24a.
Right. Okay, cool. Okay, so this section is about handicrafts, and that might be why it sticks in my mind because, I love handicrafts, and so I'm always studying up on handicrafts. It's from Home Education, and it's on page 316, but Charlotte Mason says that children's work should be kept well within their compass. So what she means by that is that children shouldn't be given work that is harder than they are able to do well. So if something is outside of their skill set, we shouldn't be asking them to do it.
That was interesting to me because it reminded me of copy work and about how we're always asking them to do, like we say, perfect execution, but implied in that is this idea that we're not asking them to do something that they couldn't do that way.
Right. And I think too, with perfect execution, when we say that, like perfect execution, we tend to think it means to do something perfectly well, but to execute just means to carry it out, like to do all the steps. So to perfectly execute something, you are doing all the steps correctly. So that's how, like, even with copy work, because I think this is a principle that goes across the board. If we're asking them, to write their C's and perfectly execute that, it would be that they're holding the pencil correctly, they've got their paper in the correct position, they're moving their hand the right way, and they can do all that and still have kind of a wonky looking C, but it would be perfectly executed. And then over time, they get better at that. And then they're able to move on, to a new shape of letter. And so it's the same thing And, and that's really what it means to be within their compass, something that they are capable of executing perfectly. They can do all the steps and gradually get better and better at it, and then be ready for more.
Sometimes this is misinterpreted, this concept. I don't think a lot of people talk about this quote, but I just think this concept, you don't mean that they don't do anything that's challenging.
No, not at all. I just mean that they're going to do things that are challenging, but at a level that they're able to accomplish, versus doing something that is so far beyond their skill set that they can't even get there. And I think when we do that, when we make something more challenging than a child is able to realistically reach, that's when kids feel really discouraged. And with a lot of kids, you will know you're doing that because they'll just give up. They'll just be like, I'm not going to be able to do it right anyway. Why should I even try?
Yeah.
And not want to do it. And I think that happens a lot with a lot of kids. And I think moms feel that way a lot too.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, this concept. I remember, okay, so I'm not going to name the parenting book that I read because I actually wouldn't recommend it to anyone.
Yeah. But now we're curious.
Yeah. I'm like, I'll tell you later. But when my oldest was tiny, I read this book. And one concept I took away from it that I thought was really positive was this idea of parenting inside this funnel. And it was kind of like that, this like funnel of what they're actually capable of. Mm-hmm. And not asking them to do things that they're just completely not capable of. And so we took a parenting class where the people like me had rejected a lot of the book, but had taken away this one concept. And I'll never forget in the class, we would say, we're really struggling with our toddler, XYZ. Like when I let him walk in the store, he's grabbing all the stuff off the shelves or whatever. And it's so funny because the answer was so obvious, but the teacher would often be like, then don't let him walk in the store. Like,
right.
And we're like, he just isn't handling this. Well, then don't put him in a situation where he has to. Like, he's
right.
just told you that he can't handle this. And, so taking that toddler and strapping him back into a stroller where he can't reach everything solved the whole problem. But it was like, we just didn't realize, we're giving him a temptation he can't handle, right? Like,
right.
He's two, and there's all this cool stuff at eye level. What do we really think is going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah, that is an excellent point. And we even do that with kids, like when, it's an hour past lunchtime and you are out too long and everyone is grumpy. Should we really be upset with them because we failed a little bit and didn't feed them on time? You know what I mean?
Right.
And now everyone's in the car starving on their way home. Like, we've pushed them past their limits and they can't handle it. So we shouldn't be surprised and we shouldn't get angry because they're too far past their limits.
Yeah. When we learn to keep them inside of their limits, it seems like they actually handle it better when they're outside of it.
Yeah.
It's kind of counterintuitive because I would think, just if I was thinking about this logically, well, we need to be outside our limits regularly in order to practice handling this. How can I handle, being a nice person while hungry if I don't practice being a nice person while hungry? But what's interesting, my kids, it's actually when I've done a generally good job of making sure they are fed well and they get enough exercise, enough sunshine, enough sleep, like all the basic things, that then when that doesn't go well, they handle it way better than if, for the last, 14 weeks, they've been too tired, too hungry, too,
Yeah.
And it's like, it kind of backfires. So the practice wasn't actually helping. It was just making them not even trust that I would feed them at some point.
That's true. It kind of goes against, the idea of habits. Like, if they don't have any habits to fall back on, like regular meal times, then life just feels chaotic. That's why it's good to have limitations and good to have set boundaries, because then everybody knows what to expect. And when something is a little out of the ordinary, that that's not going to be the norm, the extraordinary thing, you're going to go right back to the normal thing. And so I think that's why it's easier to handle, because you know that this is a temporary situation, versus if all the time, they didn't know when they were going to eat. That's anxiety inducing, because you just don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast with you is because you took this stuff and when we were having a conversation and started applying it to moms. And I was just like, wow, I hadn't really thought about this way. So
I was thinking, if it's so important for us as moms to make sure that our children are always, within their compass. Oh, and I should say, for this idea, by a compass, we mean an enclosing area. So if you think of yourself or your child as the middle point of a compass, like a school compass to make a circle, you're the middle point, and then you take, that compass all the way around you, and those are your limitations, that circle. So you have to be within the circle. So I was thinking, if the children always need to be within that circle of, ability and habit and all these other things to do well and to flourish, what about us moms? Don't we have a compass? Don't we have limitations? And if we don't recognize our limitations, what happens to us?
We start crying a lot.
We do start crying a lot.
We call our husband and say, I'm sending these kids to public school.
Yes, we fantasize about hours alone in the house to do all the things we want to do.
I appreciate you saying that, because I've thought about that. Like I wrote that series on my blog, the Low Energy Mom's Guide to Homeschooling, which is not done. It's sort of an ongoing series I write about a couple times a year, not much. But I wrote a post on accepting our limitations. Like if a mother is chronically ill or is dealing with insomnia, and I don't pretend to understand what it's like to be seriously ill, like cancer or something, but just there's a lot of people with autoimmune and just issues going on where they feel like, wow, all these other moms can run circles around me or something. And in that situation, the first step is understanding it, like just accepting where you are, accepting you will never be the mom that can take her kids to 4 field trips in one day. And that's okay.
Right.
Like, this is obviously not God's call on your life right now. But I hadn't really thought about that in this larger context that you were placing it, because you were even talking even about our own skills, like how we come into home education and we feel the weight of our own ignorance. Like there are things we don't know, we don't have knowledge, we don't have skill. There's all these things we're lacking, and it can be crushing if we're not careful of just all the things that we feel like we need to do, and we want to tackle it all at one time.
Yeah. I think the reason that this made sense to me, like why I had this idea, is because I want to do all these things, but I have so many limitations on my own life. And so, I mean, I'm active in the Charlotte Mason world. There are so many things I want to research, so many things I want to do. I'm totally a believer, I love Charlotte Mason and all her ideas. But as I've been doing it longer, I have had to accept the limitations that I have on my life. And it's not related to my health, or anything like that. And so sometimes I think too, we can feel like, well, nothing is wrong with me. Why can't I do all these things?
Right.
Everyone is telling me that I can do these things or that I should do all these things, but still I'm not able to do these things. So, what's wrong with me? Like, what am I doing wrong? And so for me, I had to kind of sit down and realize, for a long time, my limitations were related to the ages of my children. I only have 3, but, they were, let's see, when we started, my oldest was 6, and then I had a 3-year-old and then a baby. So, I had to deal with 2 who were not being schooled, and that was very limiting, and it affected our schedule. Then with the schedule, my husband's schedule has always been different. It's always been a couple evenings and a couple early mornings. So he wouldn't be around, even for like regular bedtime things to help with kids. And I couldn't even count on him like being out of the house so that we could do our regular morning routine. And then we moved in the last 4 years. I think we moved 3 times. So that's a big deal when you have a lot of little kids. And then with husbands, my husband, he's totally cool with Charlotte Mason. He's totally supportive of everything I do, but he's not into it. He kind of doesn't care about Charlotte Mason. And which is fine. As there have been more men who are becoming active in the Charlotte Mason world, it's great and it's wonderful. But sometimes I kind of wonder if some of the moms feel badly that maybe their husband isn't involved in some of these things, or that their husband isn't fully on board, or that, he doesn't want to quit playing video games. You know what I mean? Or start reading
take away
books.
their television.
Exactly.
That's what I've seen about lately. Yeah.
Yeah. And then he lets the kids watch television. But this stuff, like we do have control over those kind of things when husbands are not home. So when they are home and we don't have control, it's just kind of a thing to accept. It's another limitation to just accept, and move on.
Right.
Instead of dwelling on it. So I was thinking just about all these other limitations that people can have, not just the ones that I've had and that I mentioned, but financial limitations. Sometimes maybe that means you can't buy all the books that you want to buy, or you can't go on the field trips, or you only have one car, so you can't do a co-op or something that you would rather do. And then even where you live, I live out in the country now, and it's about 30 minutes to go anywhere, even the grocery store.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then, if you live in a city and you can't go, to full days of nature as often as you would like to. So with all these limitations, I feel like we have to recognize that. We have to accept those limitations and make that, our compass, so that we can work within it instead of feeling defeated, instead of seeing other moms and what they're capable of doing and feeling like we're failing. And instead of, loading on all these burdens and things we think we should be doing, or that we've been told we should be doing, and then feeling, that we just can't. And so we must be failing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I'm seeing all the possibilities as you're talking about this, because if we think we don't have any limitations, I mean, first of all, that's just not true. Everybody has limitations, whether it's financially or one of the other things you already talked about or whatever, but there's always some limitation. But when we think we don't have them, or we think that we shouldn't have them, we actually end up banging our heads against the wall of reality.
Right.
And it's so frustrating. And it's so self-defeating versus within this compass that you're talking about. Once we have this defined space that we're going to work with it, and those things do change. Like some of the things you're talking about do change. So you can have a financial limitation and then your husband gets a different job.
Right.
Or you can live in the country and then later you live in the city or whatever. I mean, things change. So it's not like our compass is something we're accepting forever. But accepting it for right now means that now that I have this defined circle I'm working inside of, I can get really creative. There was a time when I was giving a talk. Oh, I remember what it was. It was a Q&A where I was standing in for a speaker that had gotten sick at a conference. And so we just did a live Q&A, and it was, I mean, part of it, I think I scared people. I think I accidentally scared people to get away from Charlotte Mason because I made some passing comment about listening to 16 narrations a day.
Oh gosh.
And like all of the mothers, like fear and trembling. And I was like, oh wow. Like they're actually, like if this had been a room full of experienced high school Charlotte Mason moms, they would have all shaken their heads and been like, yes. But instead I just scared people. So it was terrible. I feel really bad about that. Anyway, but I felt like I disappointed people because when I got a question about nature study, I started talking about how to make it work in your backyard or at your local park when your park is like a defined play area with lots of concrete and some not artificial trees, but you know what I mean? Like they were planted there as part of a landscaper's decision, not naturally occurring because, some acorn fell somewhere. And I felt like I disappointed people, but I was thinking, but I didn't have words for it at the time. This is the compass that I have lived in for a very long time. And when I had lots of little babies and also had some fairly serious health problems, the idea, like if someone had told me that in order to do nature study, I had to have all of, it had to be this natural environment and we had to hike down a dirt path and nothing could be paved and like this picture of what I thought nature study was. If someone had told me I had to do all of that, it would have just been crushing because I hardly had the energy to buckle all 4 kids into their car seats.
Yeah.
And so, but if someone tells me, here's all of the ways to use your backyard, and here's all the ways to attract native birds to your front yard, and here's like the things that we did in those times. And I mean, we do get an occasional nature walk, but honestly, we still live almost an hour from decent hiking places. And so it still is a commitment that I can't make weekly, like to do that thing. You know, we talk about banging our head against reality. I think I would have just not done nature study. Like it can't be perfect, so we're not going to do it.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
I've lived where you live. Growing up in California and being, you know, in that environment, and now I'm in North Carolina, I totally know what you mean. That's all there is. Like parks, you know, that the city put out there with like grass, you know, that gets watered every day, and sometimes not, sometimes just gravel or whatever. That's all that there is. And so, yeah, you have to take advantage of whatever is there compared to someone, you know, who lives in another part of the country where you can just go on your neighborhood walk and your neighborhood was like cut into the forest that was already there.
Right.
It's going to be totally different. And so we do have to learn to recognize what is around us, recognize what our limitations are, so that we can still use Charlotte Mason's, you know, principles and methods to the best of our ability with what we have. Like we have to work with what we've got. Otherwise, yeah, just why not give up? You know, if you can't do it perfectly, it makes you feel like, well, I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to give up. There's something easier. You know, I'd rather do a workbook or whatever. Because then at least I know I would be doing it right.
Right. Oh, you know what? You just reminded me of something, and I didn't think of it until right now. So I didn't look up the quote, but I remember reading somewhere, and I think it's in the volumes, where they were talking about working with the children of the miners. And I think it was the children of the miners. Anyway, so basically they're working in this super poor area, and this wasn't how it was talked about. But as I think about it now, they had to accept that child labor was a thing, and these kids were going to be in school with them in the mornings. But this whole thing about afternoon occupations and all that stuff was not going to happen with these kids. They were going to go probably work the whole afternoon and evening, which also probably means they were coming to school tired, I would think.
Yeah.
And what was interesting to me, looking back on this now in this context, was they were just going to maximize the hours that they did have those kids. They weren't going to worry about all the hours that they didn't. And I think that's another example of this, where it's like, those were the limitations, right? The limitations were that they had these children for, let's say, 4 hours. They just did what they could do and knew that it would bear fruit in their lives, even though they didn't get to do, you know, embroidery at 2:00 in the afternoon or whatever. That's a really good lesson for us to learn. Cause you run across moms, like they're single moms and they might have split custody, or they're working moms. And so they don't actually get to be there in the afternoons or whatever. And, you know, we can still apply the principles when we are there.
Right. And I think too, you know, as homeschool moms, we might have like a similar issue just in terms of right now, we might not be able to do all the things that we want to do because, you know, maybe we have a whole bunch of little kids or you're working part-time or something like that. But, you know, if you continue homeschooling, or even if you just continue with the philosophy, maybe in a few years you can start handicrafts. You know, like maybe in the summertime you can spend more time in nature study. So like you were saying, you know, our compass changes. So we need to reassess periodically to see what we can do. Oh, and then there's this other quote that I really like. It's from a Sloyd article that I'm always talking about because it's really awesome, by C. Russell. But he says that the teacher, with her hidden art, helps the child to vanquish difficulty after difficulty by, you know, kind of doing the small steps, you know, one thing at a time. You accomplish that and then you move on and then you do the next hard thing and you don't even realize that it's hard because you're growing gradually. And so you mentioned before how I was talking about this idea of a compass, you know, with the mom. We're starting with only so much knowledge. I, you know, was fortunate enough to find Charlotte Mason when my oldest was like 3.5. So I did have a couple years in before we actually started, which still didn't, you know, really prepare me for what we were going to do. But some people, you know, they like hit the ground running. They start when their kids are already have been at, you know, public school, or they've been doing a different methodology. And so they don't have time to just like hang around and read Charlotte Mason's books. They have to actually start implementing as much as they can, as soon as they can. Starting that way, you can only have so much understanding. You know what I mean? Like you can only do the best that you can do. And over time, you know, that child who was maybe 10 when you got started you might not know how to do all the things the most perfect way, or even know what all those things even are. But in a couple years, you're going to get those first things down, and you're going to get them down well. And then you can move on, to the next subject, or go deeper into that subject that you've been working on at kind of a Form 1,
Yes.
first grade level. We're growing our compass, like, that vanquishing difficulty after difficulty. It's like your compass is growing larger and larger gradually over time if you don't force it, if you don't push the boundaries so hard that they break. I was planning to wait on Latin like a year or two, just because I don't have a handle on it. I don't know any Latin at all. I was never taught Latin. It's not an interest that I have. But my oldest daughter, who is 10, is really interested in Latin. She wants to be an ornithologist when she grows up.
Oh, wow.
So she's been learning the scientific names, of all these birds. And she just like picks up, words and remembers. So she has been telling me that she really wants to do Latin. So I was looking, kind of on the internet to see what I could find. And I found one of your old articles about Latin and how you are facilitating the study of Latin, not actually teaching. Yes. And I was like, okay, that's what I need to do, because I can't teach it because I don't know it.
Yeah. Well, and even, I tried to learn alongside, and I don't remember if I said that in this article, but I tried to learn alongside, and it was okay in the beginning because beginning Latin is, I think, familiar enough. We all had to take Spanish or whatever in high school. Mm-hmm. And so it just, language learning itself in the very beginning is familiar enough that we're like, oh, we could do this, right? And it got to where I was holding my child back. Your children have all these hours in the day when you're doing laundry.
Yeah. Like washing dishes.
Yes. To like study stuff they're interested in. And I realized, if I continue down this path, this child is not going to get to do what he has an obvious desire to do because of me. Like, I'm letting my ignorance hold him back. And so, I felt like, okay, so one of the things that schools have going for them, and I feel like I'm sort of a diehard homeschool mom in the sense of, before I ever met Charlotte Mason, like, I just wanted to homeschool. I like homeschooling itself. But with that said, one of the things that schools have going for them is this division of labor. The classroom teacher doesn't have to be the music teacher. Sometimes doesn't have to be the PE coach. You know what I mean? Like, you're not actually having to prepare every single lesson the child is having. And I thought, okay, so as they get older, sometimes our job becomes finding them teachers and resources instead of being the resource for everything. And I felt that way with Handicrafts, which I've had varying levels of success. I don't feel like non-crafty in the sense of I couldn't learn to do these things. I'm just non-crafty in the sense of I never have learned to do these things. So now,
Yeah. And I think too, well, for starters, I think you in realizing that, you recognize your limitation on what you were able to teach. And so then just knowing that helps you to be okay with passing it off and not feeling like you have to teach your child every single thing until he graduates. But I think too, it's okay to recognize that we don't have to like every single thing. You know what I mean? So like,
I'm sorry. What did you just say?
We don't have to like it all. I don't want to spend my time researching subjects that I don't care about. So I can either facilitate and help someone else to teach my child and set that up for it to work. I can give my child books about the thing that the child is interested in. There are other things that we can do to help the children to learn without having to go deeply into it ourselves. You know what I mean? Like music, for example, I don't know anything about music. I can listen to music, and that's about the extent of it. So for my children who are interested in music, they have to get that somewhere else that's not me. And, eventually we'll be doing lessons. We're not right now, but I'm not going to learn solfa, for example, because I can't sing and I don't know anything about music. So it would take too much of my time to learn solfa, and it wouldn't be a good use of my time when I can learn about other things that I'm interested in, that I care about, that I can grow in faster, and then go alongside my children with those things. You know what I mean? While like outsourcing the other things that I can't do.
Okay, so to get into like some practical considerations here, I am a mom. I want to start Charlotte Mason. And let's even say I'm starting at the beginning. Like I found, my oldest child is going into year 1. Like I am at the beginning here. But there are all these things that I don't know. And there's all the overwhelm because usually if someone has a firstborn in first grade, usually they have other children that they're dealing with. And so what is your advice? They are aware of their compass in the sense of they have a list of things that they don't know. I mean, we all have that in our minds, I think, when we start, or we get a rude awakening very early on.
Yeah.
But what do you say to that mom? Because I always feel like this tension of like, you should learn stuff, but I totally don't want to overwhelm you because I remember very vividly the overwhelmed feeling. And I certainly don't want to add, to burdens for anyone.
Well, I think another thing too, before I answer that, is that we also have to be careful not to give people excuses. And I know that there is some, I don't want to say fear, there's some like discomfort among people who talk about these things because they don't want to give people excuses for not doing what they should be doing. And I really think that part, I mean, it's the only person who is responsible for what they're doing and really responsible to God is the mother who is teaching. So if a mother is looking for excuses, she's going to find them anywhere. You know what I mean? It doesn't take much to find an excuse. So for the moms who are not looking for excuses, the moms who are really trying to do their best, I do think first it is important to understand what your limitations are. And then I think that you should have something to guide you. So to have a curriculum that you're following while still understanding that you're going to do the best. So the best that you can do. So that curriculum, like you shouldn't be a slave to it. You know what I mean? And whatever it is, there are a whole bunch of really good Charlotte Mason curriculums now that are available for people to choose from. But if you have that to help guide you, if you're continuing, to read Charlotte Mason and to move forward with your understanding, then you can start to think outside the box a little bit, I think. What I always did with my kids when I had 2 younger ones who napped, we did school several times through the day in small bits because I could only school when my youngest was napping or had food in his mouth. Because if he was awake and not, confined to a high chair, he was crawling all over me. He used to, when I was reading, he used to put his hand on my mouth for me to be quiet because he wanted my attention. So I had to do it, a little bit in the morning at breakfast. I had to do it during lunchtime, afternoon nap time, and in the evening. And that was the only way we were able to get school done. And it's, it's okay to do those things, to adjust the way that you need to adjust so that you can get things done and so that you can enjoy what you're doing so it doesn't feel like drudgery.
Okay, so what do you say when someone tells you, and this might be controversial to say, but that Charlotte Mason schools weren't scheduled that way?
I would say that Charlotte Mason schools didn't have multiple babies and toddlers walking around to distract the teacher during that time. If there were, Charlotte Mason schools that didn't cost what private schools cost and we could send our kids to them, I'm sure most of us love to do that. And I believe they also had assistants to even help. So even though they were doing multiple forms at the same time, kind of like our old-fashioned one-room schoolhouses, they still only had school-age children. And teaching only school-age children is so much easier than having children who are not school-age than just having them around.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what I mean?
I know what you mean because I will tell you. So, I had years where I had 3, and this was kind of before all of this grouping into forms was really a thing. And so I wasn't combining much of anything. And I did finally learn to combine, but it wasn't as much talked about when I first started. So I have all of these illiterate children. And they're all in like different grades and I'm reading to everybody. And anyway, I'm totally overwhelmed. So this is I would say my first year. So my oldest is in 11th grade and my youngest is in 4th grade. And the 2 in the middle are in, what are they in? 8th and 6th this year. So but this is the first year where pretty much everybody can read everything. So my fourth grader, I'm reading Robinson Crusoe, but like having kids that can all read for themselves was even a different ball game than before where they were all school age. But because we have one that needed more help for longer, I ended up with all these kids I'm reading aloud to, and it was so exhausting. And this year, I mean, it almost feels surreal sometimes where I'm like, wow, I have downtime during the school day.
That sounds amazing.
Like, what's wrong? Like there were a few days where I sat there thinking like, is there something I'm supposed to be doing or forgetting to do, or like, because it just,
Wow.
For 10 years we did school and I had to be on for like every second of the day, and they actually can all read independently. And so I am, taking all the narrations and fielding math questions and all that, but I feel so much more like a facilitator than I ever have before. And it is just weird.
Yeah. That sounds so nice though.
And it is. And I think it helps that they have all been habit trained. I don't have a difficult teen boy, and that happens. Some teen boys can be difficult. And so, I have a lot of things going for me that I think are a real just God's grace in my life.
Yeah.
Probably understanding I needed a year of mercy this year. But it really is. Okay, I got to tell you, I'll have to dig up this quote and put it in the show notes. But I remember reading one time, and I don't think this was Charlotte Mason. I think it was like in the Parents Review or something, but it was called into question whether a governess should teach more than 3 forms. And I read this last year, and so it was like whether or not that was asking too much of the governess to teach 3 forms. And I just laughed out loud because last year I had children in 4 forms.
Yeah.
So I have 4 kids and really none of them could be combined. It wasn't appropriate to. Now I did combine some things, but they are far enough apart that everybody fell into a different form. And so I just laughed because I thought, this feels hard because it is actually hard.
Yeah.
And even a trained teacher maybe wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have been asked of even a trained Charlotte Mason teacher. And
she wouldn't have been doing laundry and dishes and cooking meals and driving people places either.
Exactly. So they're asking whether or not she should have to do that. And she didn't have to turn around and make dinner. But it was freeing also to just embrace, okay, this is a hard year, first of all, but then I'm not actually failing that this feels hard because it was called into question whether this should even be done.
Yeah, it's legitimately hard.
Exactly.
Well, I think that it's sad that we do kind of feel like we're failing anytime that we're not meeting what we believe is the status quo, but we don't really, we only have limited information. You know what I mean? Yes. we have a lot of information in the Parents Review, and we do have a lot of great things available to us to read, but it's different than just talking with the moms who are actually doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, we don't know all the circumstances that were happening at that time. And there are a lot of things. I know that on the Charlotte Mason Poetry blog, they posted all these letters from mothers, and they were very normal mothers. They were a lot like us. They talk about their kids not behaving perfectly well, and things that were difficult for them. I know when I was just at the Charlotte Mason Living retreat and I was talking about work, and the mother's work really, but there was a mom who had written in saying, there are all these things that I'm supposed to be doing. How can I do all these things because it's so hard?
Yeah.
So, they had, a few little bits of advice, but basically it just is hard. We just do have limitations and we have to work within them, accept them. And if we do that, then it is freeing. We can not quite relax, but we can have peace about what we are doing because we know that we're doing our best and we know that we're doing what we're capable of doing.
Yes. My mom, when I was growing up, always was saying this. She just said this like a mantra every time my sister and I freaked out about something. She would say, all you can do is the best you can do with what you knew at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because we would be, my sister and I, caught up in looking back and being like, oh, if I'd only known, I would have done X, Y, Z, so differently and blah. And then all this mess wouldn't have happened. But it really, I realize now, I find myself saying that, like, we can look back on our own homeschooling and be like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. Or I wish but all we can do is the best we can do with what we know at the time. And I feel like, so there's so many things, because there's what we know at the time, which is a limitation of knowledge. And so lots of times we start out on a Charlotte Mason education, but we don't actually know her philosophy very well. So we're just kind of bumbling through it. I feel like that's a great context, because then it's the best you can do with what you knew at the time. So there's the responsibility to grow, but there's also this whole, like, you shouldn't be heaping guilt on yourself for the past. Like, you're responsible for what you know now, not for what you didn't know then.
And yeah, even accepting, I think, that your oldest child is going to get a different education than your youngest child, just because you are that much further along by the time you get to the youngest child.
Yes. Yeah. The younger children are luckier than they realize, I think.
They are. And then they get that time at the end too, when they're the only ones home.
Yes, but I will tell you, I was really glad that I think it was Cindy Rollins on one of the Mason Jars talked about how she realized how hard it was for her youngest child after being in such a busy house, 8 older siblings, and then everybody leaves and it's just him, and how hard that was for him. And I thought, I need to keep this in mind, because I think that it'll be hard for my youngest, that quietness. Like, I might need to hold his last 2 years of high school with kind of an open hand, as far as sometimes we have to compromise in terms of, I found this class that he can take, but it's not perfectly Charlotte Mason.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like, just because there's other things that he needs, or it's outside my level of competence, or whatever, because especially in the high school years, it's like, it really is a competence issue. Like, if my child wants to learn calculus, I don't know it. And so I might have to settle for a math teacher that's not really like Charlotte Mason, because that's the math teacher I can find.
And I think too, that kind of goes to this other point I had on here, as far as understanding who we are as mothers and what our duties are, and kind of what order those duties fall in. Because, our duties to our children to take care of their needs, those would actually be higher on the importance scale than our duty to follow Charlotte Mason perfectly well. You know what I mean? And I mean, although you could argue that Charlotte Mason's philosophy would tell you that you need to understand the needs of your child, and that is a more important duty.
Yeah.
But if we're overly focused on Charlotte Mason, and again, I love Charlotte Mason, but the point of doing Charlotte Mason and being a Charlotte Mason educator is not to be a Charlotte Mason educator. It's only helpful in the way that it helps you with all your other duties. So before we're homeschool parents, before we're homeschool teachers, we're mothers before that, we're wives before that, so these are the things that are most important, and we can't let the stress that we have, or all these things that we're putting on ourselves that we need to know, we can't let Charlotte Mason get in the way of our relationships with our husband and with our children.
Yes. I love that so much. Just because I feel like I've said a couple times this week to different people that really early on, because so my husband has read Charlotte Mason. Now he's read a couple volumes, but I mean, for the first 10 years of our homeschooling, he, I think, even felt competitive with her. Like, she took my attention. And some of that's my fault. Like, I just get really obsessed with any new thing that I'm excited about. And, so it could have been anything. It just happened to be her. Probably a flaw.
I know what you mean.
But I mean, someone really early on was like, you do not sacrifice your marriage on the altar of your homeschool philosophy. And it was just really good advice for me to hear early on. And so I kind of passed that on a couple times this week, because there's all this pressure, that we can start putting on husbands to conform to this thing they haven't even read. And now they're mad.
Right. Well, and even the time we take away from them, you know what I mean? Like, what is better, to stay up late reading Charlotte Mason, or to go hang out with your husband when he wants you to, even if he's just going to watch, a dumb sitcom?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we still need to be there for our family, even if we would maybe rather be reading Charlotte Mason,
Right.
we can't let that get in the way. And, you know, I'm like, you know, like I get into stuff and all excited about it and talk about it a lot, but we have to make sure we're keeping that balance and like that hierarchy of, you know, what are my duties? Who am I as a person? You know, where does Charlotte Mason fall on that scale? Lower than husband and children for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know, okay, so that's an interesting thing that you said, because we talk about, you know, Charlotte Mason says children are born persons. That's the first principle out of her 20 principles. And so then we turn around and we say, oh, mothers are born persons. So we weren't born Charlotte Mason educators. We were born persons. And it's interesting though, how it gets it's so easy to let, I mean, anything that we love, right? So this is something that I think those of us who are attracted to philosophy in general just love thinking all these thoughts. Like we just love this, even on the philosophical level and not just on the practice level. But like at the end of the day, it's easy for anything that we love, even if it's, you know, someone who really loves exercising or natural medicine or cooking or whatever, like anything can become a disproportionate love where like all of a sudden it's become, well, really that idol in our life. Like we've let that thing become the central organizing principle of our lives instead of what are the two greatest commandments, right? Love God, love the Lord your God, with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And those are my calls, the calls on my life as a person, ultimately, and not, you know, all these other things. And even though they're good things.
Yeah, exactly. I think even too, to kind of quote Charlotte Mason is a good servant and a bad master. So if we've made our lives, you know, centered around Charlotte Mason instead of using her ideas to make our lives better, then we're out of proportion. You know, we've made her or her philosophy our idol instead of enriching our lives, you know, and having that abundant life by being interested in all the things that, you know, she tells us that we should be interested in. That's something too. I've been talking to a couple friends about this. I have been, for myself, lately more excited about the things that she tells us we should be doing and talking about versus studying Charlotte Mason herself. And I told you about this, but with my Charlotte Mason study group, we actually decided to take a break from Charlotte Mason, and instead we're reading Mansfield Park by Jane Austen, because we agree with Charlotte Mason so much that our discussion was really boring. You know, like we would go off on tangents and talk about other things because we were like, yep, here's a quote that we love. Totally agree. And, you know, it just wasn't, we weren't growing with that. So now that we've been doing Mansfield Park for the last few weeks, it's been great because, you know, most of the women have not read Mansfield Park before. So they're, you know, growing in their knowledge of literature and Jane Austen. And then we're discussing the characters and how their behavior, you know, plays out. And, you know, we're thinking with our Charlotte Mason lens and talking about, you know, how these people were raised and how they were educated and how that has affected them as young adults. But I feel like, you know, lately for our group and for me in particular, that is how I am currently growing, is just by taking the time to go outside in nature and to nature journal and to research those kinds of things and read more books rather than just focusing on studying Charlotte Mason.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think I told you, my group, we stopped, we try to do like in between a volume, and our group has not read all of the volumes together yet. We go super slow, and we've had lots of turnover. So we have lots of new people. So I'm always thinking about, what do these new people not know because they weren't with us when we did our Start Here 20 Principles study, you know, 8 years ago or whatever. And so, you know, how do we catch them up so we're all on the same page? It's always a tension for me. But anyway, so we read Home Education, and then we spent, I don't remember if it was 6 or 7 months, but we read 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child by Anthony Esalen, which I actually have a study guide coming out on that soon.
Nice.
But it was so much fun and if anybody wants to use the study guide, I'm going to recommend that they have read at least one Charlotte Mason volume together first before they do this. Because what was fun is, I don't think he's ever read Charlotte Mason, but a lot of her principles play out in the types of things he's talking about, because he's talking about being outside versus being inside, and reading stories versus, reading a textbook and all these different things come into play, but in a totally different context. But it's a more modern context because he talks about the problems with, the temptations of screens or the fact that nobody else is outside anymore, or, all these different problems that our kids run into. And so it was so fun to read it, but to have, we already had the philosophy as a context for then reading this book. It was just, we had a great time. So we plan to do that every time, actually. So right now we're in the middle of volume 2, but then choosing something. And now you have me considering choosing fiction, which I never really thought about before. But with you doing Hansel Park, I'm like, oh, that's really fun. I hadn't really thought about it.
Well, you actually gave me the idea because you told me that you guys do that. And so I asked my group, I was like, okay, guys, what do you think about reading something else? And I said, do you guys want to read a parenting book? And they all said, no. So I was like, okay, let's read Jane Austen. But yeah, it's been really fun. And I think too, with our children, they read, great literature so that they can learn these things and, see kind of the character development and how things play out and what consequences are of the choices that these people are making. So I was like, why shouldn't we as mothers also be looking at things from this angle and discussing them and, getting excited about it just the way that we expect our children to?
I think that's great. So great. Okay, so we're going to have to start wrapping this up, but I was thinking, I wanted to go back. We identify our limitations because I don't want to say, once you've accepted that you have them, and that's harder for some people than for others, but once you've accepted that you have them, then it becomes pretty easy to start identifying what those are currently. But I was just thinking about a few, ways of encouragement, because we don't want to just stay, some limitations are not under our control. If you're caring for an elderly relative, that's not under your control. We know that those things do tend to pass with time because lots of times you're dealing with end-of-life care, but it's not something you can get out of. That's your duty. And education is an atmosphere, right? So learning to relate rightly to that circumstance is just your calling in that moment. With that said, there's other things we can get out of, which is our ignorance of Charlotte Mason's philosophy, or our ignorance of a particular subject that I'm supposed to teach. There's ways around that. I spend a lot of time writing about increasing your knowledge of the philosophy itself. But when we talk about subject area knowledge, which I think is a bigger deal when you get into the upper grades, most of us can teach, adding, subtracting, and dividing, even if we weren't great math students in high school. But when we get into high school math, then it kind of matters whether or not we were great math students in high school.
Yeah.
Or in my case, I kind of was, but have managed to forget all of it. So it kind of didn't, all those good grades didn't seem to matter whatsoever. So I'm trying to think about what our options are. Cause I think when we get into things like Plutarch and Shakespeare, it's pretty easy to look at that and say, look, you just don't start everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Give yourself a year to get good at something if you need it. You might need less time than that, but at least a year to get good at, let's say, Shakespeare before you add Plutarch, or vice versa, or whatever you're comfortable with or whatever. When we get into Latin, where my ignorance of the subject is causing a real and definite problem, I'm trying to think about what the different options are.
I think some of it, if we've been teaching our children to be self-educators, I think some of it they're going to be able to take up for themselves. I've known homeschooled children who were not even Charlotte Mason homeschooled children, but who were self-educators who've learned to play musical instruments on their own using YouTube, because their parents didn't have enough money to send them away for lessons.
Yeah.
And, they had YouTube, they did have the internet, and they were able to get the instruments. So just with a lot of practice and hard work, they were able to do that.
I love that you brought that up because I hadn't thought about it, but that gets you around your financial limitations too, because YouTube's free. And so that's wonderful. Because so many times with music, well, for us, I feel like we're at a place right now where we actually had access to virtually free music lessons, but our limitation was time. We just couldn't add one more out of the house, drive across town thing. And so it didn't matter that they were free or free
Right.
to us, I should say, because we just couldn't be gone for another, it was going to work out to about 4 hours a week by the time all 4 kids get through lessons. We literally don't have that, or I shouldn't say we don't have it. I'm not willing to sacrifice more outdoor time to add that.
Yeah.
And so we added, what's that called? Hoffman Academy.
Yes, I saw that you did that, and we're going to do that too.
And I didn't know solfa was in that, but I have been a slacker. It's like, so I'm actually a trained singer, but I find that it's something that I know how to do without necessarily being very good at teaching, which has been interesting for me. For some reason, I have this block of like, I don't know how to teach the things that I know to my kids.
Right.
When it comes to music, it's been a real, like, it's weird because it's this one subject. But anyway, not the point. I didn't know there was solfa in there. So I feel like I can even just let that go instead of trying to fit it in somewhere else and whatever. They're just doing it with him, and that's good enough right now. That is way cheaper than paid music lessons. Because I don't know if I remember correctly, I worked it out and I was like, oh, if you've paid for like a month and a half of music lessons, you've paid for a year with Hoffman.
Wow. That's a big difference.
Yes, big difference. But then also the time, there's no driving there. And even if a teacher comes to you, there's no me cleaning my house frantically before someone comes over.
Oh, you do that too.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Anyway, 1 hour's notice at least.
But I felt like, oh, all these online tools we forget about can really help us be successful in areas where we're ignorant or we're limited in some other way. Even in energy, that's a limitation we often don't acknowledge. That's like the last one. Like I can acknowledge that I don't have time or I don't, but it's hard to acknowledge I don't have energy because it feels like I'm saying I'm just too lazy for that.
Right. Yeah. And people might think that too, you know,
Yeah.
if you were to say that's your reason for not doing something.
Yeah. And I mean, there are people who are lazy, and I think we know when that's our struggle. But sometimes with energy management, it's like, I know that if I add that thing and try to do it well, then I'm not going to do the laundry or I'm not going to get dinner on the table. We're at a point where we're saying, I have to choose one of these things, and I'm going to choose a home cooked meal for my family instead of pouring my energy in this other thing, even though it's good. Yeah.
So as recognizing our limitations, we have to learn to say no. We have to learn to kind of keep that safe space for ourselves and walk away from some things. Like, what is that term? Oh goodness, now I forget. Where people want to do everything. What is it called? It's like an acronym that's got a name.
Okay. I heard someone. Is it FOMO? That fear of missing out?
Yes, FOMO,
thing?
Fear of missing out. Yes.
I had wondered for like a whole year what that was, and I looked it up the other day. What is this thing
that everyone's talking about? Because most of us have that. I don't. I'm not super social, but for so many people, you know, it's that fear of missing out, fear of their children missing out on something. And then there are consequences to that. You know, if you're doing too many things, if you're running around too many places, there are consequences.
Yeah.
So, you know, is it worth it? Is it worth a trade-off? And that's where you know, decide your limits and you set your boundaries and learn to say no when it's not ultimately beneficial for your family, for your home atmosphere, you know, for your school, for your life.
Yeah. So this actually makes us be better managers of our time. When we realize our time is limited, then we start saying, I can't do everything, so now I have to do the best things. It kind of reminds me of books. When you finally realize that you can't read all of them, then you get way pickier.
Yeah.
Right? Because you realize, oh, I probably should read the best ones actually, because I can't read all of them. And so
why do I have so much time?
Yes. And so why do I want to spend my time on this really awful book over here? Anyway. Oh, sorry. I'm laughing because I bought this book that I quit the other day because it was just.
Oh, no.
I had high expectations, but it just was not what I thought. Anyway, it's actually so, I think, freeing to say, I'm not God. I cannot be all powerful and I don't have all the energy for all the things. And I can't be everything to my children that they need. Right. I can't. So I think it also helps us rest back in God's sufficiency and say, maybe there are other people. Maybe Christ made a whole body instead of just me.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe people that you already know, you know, people at your church, other homeschool families, Relatives, there might be other people that you could ask who could help with those things.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we probably should wrap this up. This has been such a good talk. Thank you.
I know. I love talking to you, Brandy.
I love talking to you. Like hugs across the internets.
Yes.
And that's a wrap for today. Thank you for joining me here at Aftercast. If you want to find the posts associated with these episodes, just go to afterthoughtsblog.net/podcast. That's afterthoughtsblog.net/podcast. There you'll easily find links for each episode. Now is the time for me to ask you to head on over to your podcast player and give Aftercast a rating and review. While you're at it, you might as well make it 5 stars, don't you think? Leaving ratings and reviews is a way to let others know about the show, so I'd really appreciate it. And finally, don't forget in the midst of your busy days that mothers are people too. Just like your children need sunshine and good food and sleep and, yes, good books to read, so do you. So go, read a book, think a thought, and then come back and join me for the next episode.